How are you all doing? On a scale from 1 to 5, where snow globe activity at a 1 is like you're as chill can be, and 5 is it's all over the place. If I show up your fingers on your hand, where are you on that scale from 1 to 5? We got 4s, we got 2s, we got 3s, we got 2s and 3s, 3s, 2s, 3s. We have a 1. Now a 1 is interesting. It either means you're just totally chill or you've checked out. and whichever it is, what matters is what? Not what it is, but whether you realize what it is. Right? Which is it?
I think just relax.
Okay, nice. Can you attribute it to anything?
No, it's feel fine.
So I'm going to try to get the
Lines out there.
Get the lines out there. Because this is a tricky time in the semester, I would imagine, for many of us.
I can't find my, can I do it, show you after class? I had it, but I can't find the email.
Yeah, thank you. You can also just take a picture of a screenshot and text it to me, a picture of
Okay.
whatever's easiest. All right, so what are some of the challenges, just out of curiosity, that you are experiencing at this time in your life, in your law school career, that you're comfortable just sort of speaking to? It's a shared experience. We all know many of them together. Yes. The MPRE, yes. Who has an MPRE test coming up? All right. So I'm sensitive to that. It's an important test to be prepared for. Sometimes we can not prepare enough and then we're surprised. That's okay. That's just about learning and then working up from there. But please do. Some of you have texted me or emailed me saying I appreciate a little extra time because I really want to focus on that. And especially if it hasn't been a pattern, like every week, a little extra time, a little extra time, a little extra time, a little extra time, which can be its own interesting thing to explore. But if it hasn't been a pattern, and then you're like, I could really use this time, then you couldn't have a more receptive audience than I. And supporter and ally. What else? Along with NPRs, yes.
It's like everything kind of comes due at 2 points in the semester, like finals and then this weird kind of midpoint. So there's like a lot of assignments due or midterms or whatever.
Right. Yeah, right. It's interesting. And now do we have are midterms more of a thing now because of trying to accommodate a more challenging semester just because of, not just because of being remote, because of the pandemic, et cetera?
I think so.
It's possible too. It's like a lot of us are 3Ls and in our topics classes, which have midterms in them.
Sorry.
It's that and the essays. And
Yeah.
being like picked at awful times in the semester to be
Right.
Yes.
Yeah, it's challenging, isn't it?
And not having spring break too.
Yeah.
I don't know if this has been everybody else's experience, but I've noticed that this semester and kind of last semester, teachers have been assigning more things like
there's been more
papers
work.
and stuff like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I either have an incredibly more difficult workload or I have nothing.
Yeah.
Like it really went one way or the other. Like it intended to be like what you were saying with, oh, you're at home now? Here's double the work.
Yeah.
Same amount of time. Have fun.
Yeah. Well, I hope I'm not contributing to that. I definitely appreciate that, whenever anybody's contributing to it, meaning whatever it is in life, whether it's in class or something else, it does put the pinch on everything else, right? So it's of course, I think we have a responsibility at the law school, and I know that my colleagues share this, to have you sort of engaged in the hard work of the practice of the study of law and preparation for the hard work of the practice of law, while at the same time being attentive to the bigger picture and trying to balance those two, which isn't so easy, right? It isn't so easy. It's not easy for an organization and institution to do it. A lot of different people, a lot of different perspectives, a lot of different attitudes, and then when you go into the practice of law, or whatever you do with your law degree, you can't count on that organization to necessarily offer it up, just because the leaders of organizations are themselves struggling. If you didn't realize that, look at the suicides of sad suicides of some of the greatest attorneys that we have had in our community. just the burnout, and it trickles down. As you may know, the leader, it trickles down one way or the other. And what's really nice, I mean, this part, if you have an opportunity with class N to hop onto the 12:30, 12:45 mindfulness guided practice today, it is Christina Sava. Christina Sava was sitting where you're sitting roughly about 7 or 8 years ago in the Mindfulness and Law class. She went on to become the president of the Insightful Mind Initiative, the mindfulness student organization. She's now been practicing law for a good number of years, and she is one of the leaders of the Young Lawyer Division of the ABA Wellness Committee, where they're doing all this mindfulness and other meditative and wellness practices, but she's keen on mindfulness because of her training here and her interest in preparation for for a variety of reasons. And in particular, at the mid-year ABA conference, they're going to be having a mindfulness meditation every day that she's in charge of, and she'll be guiding today's practice. So you might enjoy that. Plus, she's just absolutely terrific. And one of the reasons why it's sort of maybe helpful to be reflecting on, you all have different interests and relationships to mindfulness. You'll take some of you, or you'll take it with you front and center in your career. Others of you will be aware of it and have sort of an interesting, about it and can draw on it if you choose to. But like Christina, when you enter a firm, or you enter an organization, or you enter the profession as a leader in the bar, etc., and like Paul Singerman with his firm, it's not just going to happen. Right? You are the agents of all the ways that you can bring your leadership interests into the work that you do. In all the ways, right? And this is just one piece. But ultimately, when you find yourself in the law firm or wherever it is, and some of you already know, have a strong taste of that, who ultimately is going to attend to your psychological, cognitive, physical, emotional, social, spiritual well-being?
You.
And who's choosing to enter into the career you're choosing to enter into? You. And it's really interesting, I think, when people say, oh, I can't stand this, I can't believe they're making me do this. And I get that, I totally get that. But it's like, hello, you chose. You can choose differently, you can change your mind. And oftentimes, I think we can find ourselves, maybe you have a taste of this, maybe you will in time, so I'm sharing with you just from my own experience, where we don't always feel like we have a choice. We don't always feel like we have a choice in a relationship to do something to step it up or to maybe step away. We don't always feel that choice. But you've got it, whether you know it or not. What to do when the going gets tough is not necessarily a priori known. You want to figure it out. What to do when you're in the firm that just is leaving you like overwhelmed. Sometimes we say, wait a minute, I chose to be here. I want to do this. There's a part of me that sort of doesn't. I want to hang on to, let me step into this. And it changes the entire relationship to the experience. And others are like, oh my gosh. Maybe I want to rethink this. But to have any of those be overreactions, I just got to jump into this more. Or, what am I doing here? And have them be overreactions is to perhaps not make a wise and compassionate decision. So how do we find ourselves in this more steady, balanced state when the going is getting tough? If you would, you've already got you. Good, Jordan. Turn over the landscape of the mind, and I think in one of our conversations that I had with one of you over the last week, this idea of the, what is this that we see here? Oh, you're in the what is it that we see? This army knife. What does it say at the top?
Can't read that.
Huh? Tools of awareness. Okay, so a little creative segue or tangent here. Because I am interested in, you just raised this notion that it's where you find yourself, where you are the one who's going to right? You can't count on, nor would it necessarily be even useful to not look to yourself and know from your own inner capacity, and then look to those around you for help. Or at times the inner capacity is so drained and depleted to know to look for others for help, to help us cultivate our own inner capacity and help us build ourselves up. So why do you think that this Swiss Army knife is here? In light of the title, Tools of Awareness, in light of sort of what's just been sort of put out there, and in light of what we have been exploring, especially in terms of the practices we've been learning. Yes?
I mean, I guess, obviously, Swiss Army knife has a ton of different things you can use it for, so I guess maybe the idea that there's a ton of different things you can do in mindfulness, like different practices to help you cultivate awareness, I guess, again, the awareness.
Okay, very nice. Different practices to help us cultivate awareness. And those practices and this lingo would become, I think you're saying
The tools you're
tools.
using,
Yeah, tools. Good. What else? How can we build on that? And don't worry about saying it in a slightly different way. I'm interested in just sort of us all coming around this. So I think this will be helpful to us. Yes, George.
Well, Alex mentioned practices, but I think, also good techniques, that you could, different things you can use, like do not interrupt and stuff like that.
Okay, so that wasn't where I was going at first, although that did sort of emerge when Alec was speaking. So right, which one would be do not interrupt? Which?
Which one would it be?
Was it all of them?
No, it would just be like one of them, and then another one would be stop, and then another one would be, maybe the spiral diagram.
Okay, I love that. So that's fun. Okay, so it could be tools of awareness, the metaphors, right? And then we have each of these standing for a different one of the metaphors that we've learned, right? Very nice. What else? Yes.
Also narrow down from the practices, and each individual practice could be its own Swiss Army knife.
Oh, that's interesting. So each practice could be its own Swiss Army knife. Okay, that certainly is the case, especially with a very nuanced and deep understanding of the practices, because at some level there's a lot of complexity to them, a lot of little parts. But could you also have it where the practices, not the metaphors, the practices are found in one knife?
I'm not sure what you mean. Is that what you were saying?
I think he was saying that, but we haven't identified what. Like here, we just took it to we moved it to metaphors as opposed to practices, and we sort of began to identify stop, the spiral, etc. Alec did start us off with sort of a nice sort of keen take on how we can apply this, and so we didn't talk about practices.
So each one knife or one piece could be the body scan, another piece could be each individual practice.
I know that one piece could be the body scan, one piece could be each of the other practices.
Yeah,
What are they called?
Focus attention.
Focus attention. Right now, by the way, you ought to be able to just sort of know it yourself. If you don't, if you're not going, I don't know. Focus attention.
Body scan, and I know it.
Okay, let's all pause for a moment. No one assist too soon. What is the nature of the practice? Even more important than the name of the practice is you could say the element or the instruction of the practice. Awareness. Very good. This is good. Yes, awareness is part of the practice. And anybody can chime in, not the name, but the instruction. First, we bring ourselves into a comfortable seated posture. Then we attend to the sensations of the body, and we're aware of, and then we do what? And it has to do with awareness. We expand the field of awareness around the body, around the breath, like we are sort of, the metaphor, if there is going to be one, is that we are more like a mountain, right? And we're witnessing what's coming and going, right? So open, monitoring. Okay, very nice. So thank you for getting us set up for that. focused attention, body scan, open monitoring. And by now, for each of those, you ought to be able to, and when I say you ought to be able to, it means if you don't, now's the time to go, oh wait, I should be able to do that. And if you want to be able to do that, given what I think it is that is available to you, because we don't want to, we want to just, it's like if you were taking your final exam and or 2/3 of the way through a contracts class. You'd know that it's offer, acceptance, and consideration. Right? And then to your point, it could be that, okay, this is torts, this is property, this is common law, this is et cetera. But it could also be in that case, and this is the torts knife, this is the contract knife, because once you know the subtleties, there's even more not only more to it, but more you might even do with it. So very nice. But at the level we're exploring it here, I'm suggesting it's one knife with these different pieces that you are learning to go, oh, well, what have we learned about this knife thus far? We've got this knife, and let's take it for the moment, because the way I initially was going to have us explore it was the knife that has open monitoring, focused attention, body scan, these different practices. But yes, we could go even more subtle, more deep, more sort of insight oriented, and get to these ways that the big picture droppings on these various things. So what is it we've learned thus far in this class about this knife? What have we learned about the knife? And take this question broadly. I don't have specific answers. I got one little answer in my mind that I'm interested in. It being broad, and because we have a couple of people who have some issues that have prompted them not to be here, we have a slightly smaller class today. So it's an opportunity, if you haven't heard your voice often, to let me hear your voice. It does matter. It does matter. And it's also just, I think, it matters from the perspective of class participation as a part of class. And it also matters because what you say and what you think and what you may know or what you may not know matters a great deal to our learning process together. So what is it that we have learned about this pocket knife thus far? What's the first thing? Yes, Josh.
It's dynamic.
Say more about that. I like the way you said that. You said dynamic the way you said it.
There are so many different tools that impact mindfulness, and mindfulness isn't like a dogmatic, you have to do it a certain way. There are many different ways which you can accomplish being mindful.
Okay, very nice. When you say accomplish being mindful, I'll take it where at this moment we're taking it that these are tools to help cultivate greater mindful awareness, right? Which takes us back to very early in the semester. It's like if somebody says to you, I'm not interested in mindfulness, at least the way I understand mindfulness, you're saying I'm not interested in being aware. I'm not interested in mindfulness. I don't think mindfulness makes sense. It does. I don't know what you're talking about. Right, okay. Because maybe you understand it to be something different than it is. To be aware. Now, what does that mean? Different people might say, well, to be able to focus and keep your attention on something. Okay. To be able to hold open. This ability to notice what's going on around you, what's going on within you, thoughts, feelings, and sensations, and to be able to stay aware of it, right? As opposed to lost in some distracted mind state or something like that. I can't imagine that most people aren't interested in that, and I don't think you even have to use the word mindfulness or talk about a mindfulness practice to even go there. It's sort of, mindfulness is irrelevant to that, at that level. It's just about being effective and showing up and being aware and being attentive and all that sort of stuff. We don't need mindfulness. These were considerations that were part of the landscape of law and being an effective lawyer and being an effective engineer and a terrific nurse and a physician and a person who cleans up after all the mess and all that without ever having to bring a mindfulness practice or the word meditation or mindfulness into it. But this is dynamic, and it's a reminder that there are many ways of developing and cultivating that quality. And we happen to be taking a class on one piece of the ways of doing that. And there's many. It could be religious for some people. It could be social. It could be exercise. There's so many ways of cultivating and moving into just being a little bit less distracted, a little bit more present. And we're exploring mindfulness. Just so happens that the practice names, mindfulness practices, happens to sort of, for better or for worse, be the words used for the state, the quality. But don't confuse the two. Don't confuse them. No one needs to do any of these things for the rest of your life ever. And you can be fundamentally present and aware and alert and engaged and attentive. But they're pretty direct paths, right? We're talking about being more aware or paying closer attention. These are practices of paying attention. So they're pretty direct, which in some ways is why they might be a little more challenging. They don't have a lot of fluff around them. So they're dynamic. Say more about what you mean by the dynamic. And think about practically, focus attention, open monitoring, body scan. What's dynamic about that?
Well, I guess just to expand, I mean, there's no one single way to become mindful. And a lot of the things, say like walking around, taking a walk, that's a way to, help become mindful. And a lot of people do that without even the intention of being mindful, so.
Right. That's very nice. Without even the intention of being mindful. And so, walking could be one of these, right?
Yeah.
You could also have one that just looks at major components of well-being: sleep, exercise, social engagement with people, nutrition, right? These would be just pillars of well-being. And do we even need? I think I'm hearing in what you're saying. Do we even need to know we have one to get out and take a walk?
No.
No. But when we get out and take a walk, in some ways, you could say, I'm feeling overwhelmed, or I want to process this, or I want to cultivate solitude, to be free from the ways we're exploring solitude. I'm going to do something. You could take out your knife and go, which one will I do? Oh, walking. And then you flip it open, and then you sort of take your walk. Now there, it's a practice. It's done on purpose. We understand its utility. But like I think you're saying, which is really important, whether you know the knife is there or not, it's already here. Because this class hasn't given you a knife. There's no knife that you're getting. You've already got it. Right? We don't have to say eat well. You're going to eat. We don't have to say sleep. You're going to sleep. We don't have to say connect with other people. You're going to connect with other people. We don't have to say exercise. You are going to move. But then there's a finesse, right? There's an intentionality. There's an astuteness to what that can offer us. And the ways when we're not drawing upon this, because the world is not necessarily making it easy to get a good night's sleep. It's not making it easy to eat so well. That we want to sort of go, oh, right, I got this knife. It's born with it, these pieces, whether it's the knife of mindfulness practices, whether it's the knife of well-being, whether it's the knife of, and you can take any one of those and get its own knife. Even contracts. Do you think you have to take a class in contracts? And when somebody comes up to you and goes, hey, I like your bike, can I have your bike? Well, no, but you can maybe buy it. Oh, really? Well, how much do you want for it? And you go, oh my God, there's offers and acceptances and consideration. It's just happening. It's already here. We're just sort of exploring ways of refining it and making it more useful and making it more practical, having a shared understanding. So very nice. It's dynamic. I love that. What else about this knife? Yes, Andre.
I kind of like the fact that it's like symbolic. How Swiss Army knife is symbolic of like survival. It's associated with like surviving in stressful situations.
Yes.
And it's kind of coupled with how mindfulness is also a mechanism for survival.
Yes, very, very nice. Yes, survival in the workplace, survival at home, meaning to thrive, right? To survive is to thrive, right? Or we could take survival as like just to stay alive, and then okay, well if I am, how can I maximize my experience surviving? Right? And so yes, there could be the bare bones just to somehow keep me alive, like to just stay safe. And then we can, just like with contracts. Contract law, can you imagine what it was like 10,000 years ago, 100,000 years ago? People were entering into contracts. They weren't calling it that. No one was necessarily identifying, but they were doing it. And when it was breached, they were dealing with it. But now it's in a much more refined, ideally, a more refined, shared, understood, enforceable, and because it's enforceable, to be honored, more likely kind of way. So yes, and we are endowed with the ability to pay attention to survive. And we're also endowed with the capacity, whatever endowed means to you, we also have this capacity to be aware. And we also have this nature of the mind to wander as part of survival. Right? If this mind didn't wander, you'd just be walking through the thing looking for food, you hear a little noise behind you, and you go, oh, it's a noise, it'll come and go. And then before you know it, you've come and gone. Right? So it's like, oh. But also it could be that you're sitting and studying in the library and somebody opens the door, and you hear the click, and you know, if you do this, who knows where you're going to go from there? You look at them, they're looking at their phone, you reach for your phone. Okay? So to be able to go, oh, and to have it where, this is where, which practice do you think? Now. Focus attention. Notice the mind when it wanders, bring your attention back. Body scan, attend to the sensations of the body, noticing pleasant, unpleasant results. So open monitoring. Things coming and going and like a mountain holding steady. Which one of those might be most directly pertinent when you're studying, getting something done, and there's a little click of the door, and it's nothing to do with you, but you hear it in the background.
Focus attention.
I'm not asking you.
Oh, sorry. I thought you were asking the
But I'm
class.
so glad you said that because I'll come back to you on that. Don't be biased by what she says.
I was going to say Pokemon.
Were you? So which manner? Why were you going to say open mindedness?
You can kind of be aware of that and know it's there, but not necessarily get distracted or.
Okay, very nice. If you be there, you can know it's there. But if you don't know it's there, then it's not even an issue. And again, we want to know what's there. So it's not like I want to figure out how to just, or sometimes perhaps, but not have it. And this is where you say not have it. This is where the challenge of writing the paper is going to be. And not have it. How do you phrase that? And not have it, you said, not have it become a distraction. I think that's what you said. And that's sort of moving it up, but pretty people can understand it. Your challenge in writing your paper is not to be to say it so people don't understand it. It's to say it so people understand more specifically what you actually mean and what you don't mean in the way you say it. Because things can mean a couple of different things to people like that. So the noise sort of, it moves into awareness. And then you're focused on this, and you're aware of this. Now you could have it where you're thinking about this, right? Oh, I hear the sound, I wonder who it is, wait a minute, it's not that important, I'm focusing on this, just get back to this. But it could be, but even if it is, I don't have to do that now. You can sort of talk your way through it. But wouldn't it be nice if this open monitoring tool allows it? This is the key, everyone. This is like the hardest thing to appreciate, I think. To just be a capacity that we have without having to even try in those moments. The sound comes, we note it, our intention is already clear, our focus is more firmly established, and it doesn't have the drawing power. Because we've been practicing sort of like a mountain, just being steady, present, but not focusing on something, being open as things come and go. And as you might imagine, the first time you get the Swiss Army knife and you look at some of these things and you try to use them, you might not be as what as you are having had more practice. Right. So we're practicing using these things. You already have it. You came in with it. I didn't have to put it on the required things to get. And oftentimes we don't even know we have it. We don't realize how abundant we already are. How capacious we already are. And how because we're sort of born with it, we don't have to work as hard as we might think we have to develop it, because it's already here. It's like the seed. You know, I don't know about you all, but I sprout seeds. I sprout whatever. It's amazing to take a seed that's been sitting dormant for months or years to to add a little water, and boom, it's just like, what in the world? That's, to me, one of the most amazing things. And I think these capacities are like that, although they're not dormant. They're already in use, even more so. You said you were going to say, you said focused attention. Why focused attention when the sound is out there? I like that.
Because if you wanna, you're studying in the library like now, you're here and you hear the sound of the door, just are aware of the sound and go focus again. So I guess you don't waste so much time of thinking, oh, I heard this noise, so what is this noise going to do with me? Having to think of the sound just goes straight back to it.
Okay, very, very nice, right? A nice application. The object of attention is what? What you're studying. Something comes along. Now, there's a slight variation on the theme, but it's so subtle it's almost not even worth talking about. But because we're here to explore the subtleties, let's delve into it a little bit. What would be the difference? What would be the difference? Conceptually. Experientially, you would just notice. But we just began to learn some of these practices. Between your studying and some sound comes along that normally, let's say I can't say before mindfulness, prior to mindfulness, PM, you would have been more likely to look up and, who knows where it might have led you, right? Especially if you're feeling a little antsy, especially if, you've been studying for a while. But now you're a little bit more steady. You actually, you look at somebody and within a matter of moments, they're just right back with that material. Okay. What would be the difference between open monitoring and focused attention? If we were to explain, in your paper, you might explain, here's a description going beneath the hood of how a focused attention practice might work, how it might benefit you, how it might, down the road, benefit you because of the skill that you've developed in working with that particular practice. Now remember, we're not talking about necessarily saying, oh my God, I'm being distracted, I need to practice, what am I going to reach for? No, we're talking about in that moment having the tool just naturally emerge, pop out, open, and you're not doing any of that, right? It's just, but if you were describing in your paper, you might even be picking a practice specifically because in your paper you'll probably share one practice with your reader that you find useful in particular. They're all useful, but you can't use your paper to explain everything in the world that you could possibly explain to your reader. So you'll pick one practice, probably, primary practice. And you'll explain how to do it, and you'll provide them guidance on how to guide them. You'll point them to footnotes where they can listen to it or whatever, a guided form. But they'll say, well, why? Why? Well, the focused attention practice will help you focus better. If somebody just trusts you and does whatever you say like a robot, then I guess that could work. But it's like, but what? But what? Okay, I understand the focused attention practice will help me focus better, but it's a word that's also a letter of the alphabet. But why? Like, how? How does it do this? And this is, if it was a corkscrew of how to do this, getting this thing will help you open that bottle of wine. You could just sit there forever going, how do I get this thing open? I got to get this thing open. Well, this thing will help you. And you can give it to a person, it can be like, right, it's not helping me. Digging it out, it's taking a long time, it's very frustrating, and now there's pork in my wine. No, let me show you, you understand how. And so this is the real heart of your paper, which is to explain that. So let's take a little foray of this now. You're focusing on getting some reading done, you're in a relatively quiet place, there's a little sound in the distance that in the past you would have been really sort of thrown off by for a few minutes. Even if you're thrown off for 30 seconds, we wouldn't even say thrown off. Josh is the master of the euphemism. Would come up with something like, what? What's a more act? You're not really thrown off by the little sound that takes you off for about 30 seconds.
Unsettled.
Could be unsettled, right? But that 30 seconds, if you're up on multitasking that we talked about a little bit, that you probably read about, you shifted gears. You shifted gears. You might think, well, I'm back. But it's like, where was I again? Right? What was I holding in my working memory? One of you's writing a paper on mindfulness and memory, right? Going. You know, well, it was in my working memory, and now it's gone because I was distracted. But you get back to it, you read, you flip back a page or two, you sort of pick up, and it's almost like you don't even notice this is happening. But there's consequences to this. If we even go back a couple of pages. So what would be a way of describing? So who wants to take the focused attention? Who wants to take the open monitoring, especially if you haven't spoken yet, or even if you have, that's okay. And sort of try to have us figure out, so what's the difference between the two? Because in both cases, they're both helpful. Like Josh sort of said to us, they're dynamic and they're sort of, in some ways, they serve complementary and similar ends. To actually have it where we're less pulled away by it, we're more likely to stay on task. But it's two slightly different mechanisms. Yes?
Just to be clear, you're asking us like how the focused attention practice has helped us, right?
Well, I'm
As
asking
compared to open monitoring.
I am asking how it helps us, but I'm not, so we can all be on the exact same page here. You're in the library, you're studying, there's a sound in the distance, the door opens and closes behind you. Whatever happens, happens, but because you've been practicing focused attention, it's different. It's more in alignment with the way you would like it to be. That's the key here. It's more in alignment with what you would like to be the way that you would be. That's the question. Or somebody can, somebody can speak to it from the perspective of open monitoring. How the open monitoring practice would be helpful. Is that a hand raise?
Yeah.
Did you want to contribute to that?
Yeah, I mean, for the focused attention, I think that's helped me.
Will you do open monitoring?
Sure.
Is that okay?
Why not?
Go ahead.
No, so focused attention, I think, has helped me in the awareness that I can bring my attention back really quickly. Because before, maybe I looked at my phone or I could get distracted for hours. And then now I'm aware I'm being distracted by my phone, and I could come back to whatever I'm doing, I'm reading it. And I think that's important because I've been doing the focused attention practice.
Okay, so that's nice. I would call that, if you were to say that in your paper, Lewis, I would call that, you said I'm more aware of when I'm distracted, so that's key for sure. But I didn't necessarily get what it is that's being developed. What is this is the challenge in the paper. It's like when you did your first year exams. You're like, but I said it. And they're like, well, no, you sort of assumed it, right? And it's the same thing here. Only here it's even, I don't know for sure if it's the case, it's even more subtle because it's almost invisible. Right? In fact, it is invisible. So so thank you for the broad sort of take on your experience and how it's been helpful. That's nice to hear, and it doesn't surprise me, so I'm glad to hear it. You're in the library, you're focusing on getting some work done, you're reading something. There's a sound in the background. What you just said happened. You're back with the material. What is it that was going on during the focused attention practice? What were you grappling with? What was the experience like of doing the focused attention practice? We could say, ideally, in theory, whatever you want to say, every day for 15 minutes for 6 months, so that somehow that's so different than it would have been 6 months earlier. What was it about the focused attention practice? This is similar to going to a physician and saying, I wish I could, have less anxiety, or I wish I could have less indigestion, than saying, take this pill. And you say, oh, I took the pill and I had less indigestion. So okay, but if you're writing, we talked about this a little bit yesterday, you're writing not to a patient. You're not trying to persuade anybody in your paper. If you feel that you got to persuade somebody, then I want you to rethink that. You're sharing with like a colleague why this pill might be helpful. And if you were a physician and a physician colleague said, oh, you might want to prescribe this to your patients, Or if the pharmaceutical rep said, oh, you want to prescribe this to your patients, it'll be helpful for that thing, it's a new drug, you probably would say, what?
Right.
Why? Right? What's going on? And then they say, oh, well, the mechanism of action in the body is that this hormone is released, and we go, oh, I understand that, okay. So, how is the focused attention practice translate into what you speak of as the outcome of getting back to it a little sooner?
Would it be awareness?
It is related to awareness, but awareness is like, it's not if it's the answer to everything, it says nothing.
I'm not sure. That's a difficult question.
Okay, well, yeah, it is a difficult question. I agree. If you are doing the focused attention practice, what would you do? What would you guide me right now, Lewis? Guide me through a focused attention practice. In fact, everyone's welcome to join in to this 1 or 2 minute focused attention practice. Don't worry, you can't get it wrong. You're just pulling out the blade, and we'll take it from there. You got 1 minute.
Okay, so sit up, upright and stable. Bring your attention to the breath. Breathe in. Breathe out. Aware of the sensation of the breath. You can open your eyes.
All right, very nice. That was nice, wasn't it? Nicely done. Now, I would call that a breath awareness practice. The semantics here is, I would say you reach for a slightly different tool. In some ways, you could say it's a more advanced tool. Because you assumed certain things, didn't you? You assumed certain things. What did you assume that we would find our way to do, which you probably would, even without the instruction, that you could have added to make it a little bit more of the kind of focused attention practice?
Did I say to focus your attention on the breath?
You said something like bring awareness to the breath, so it would have been probably to say, but I think everyone understood what you were saying. So you did direct our attention to the breath. That is certainly selecting an object is a hugely important part of the focused attention practice. Yes.
I'm not sure.
Okay, nice. Anybody like to, especially if you haven't spoken yet, Shannon?
That if you feel like you're wandering, you come back to the breath.
All right, so you assume that. You see on your exam, you go like, whoa, well, of course you're going to. Why do you have to say that? Right? And you said if you feel. That was interesting phrasing. Did you notice that? Shannon said if you feel.
If you catch yourself wandering, come back to your breath.
Okay, now it's if you catch yourself. Aren't these words wonderfully like, language? If you feel, if you catch yourself. I mean, they're all, it's like, oh, I caught myself. Oh, thank God, I caught myself. I was going to fall. But they're all right. I mean, they're all part of your intuitive knowing of it. You can feel your mind, you can feel in some ways, or whatever that means, and you can catch it. Okay. So, how would you, so thank you, Shannon. That's exactly what I had on my mind. And that makes sense to you, right?
Yeah.
Okay, good, wonderful. So how is it that if you're practicing focused attention at home on a regular basis, what is it about awareness? Because you left us in the sea of awareness to sort of fend for ourselves, right? Shannon gave us a little bit of a buoy to hang on to. That you would be doing that then when that sound comes along, you might more readily get yourself back to the task at hand?
You bring your attention to whatever it is that you're doing.
Right, but why? What is it about to say to somebody, oh, if you do this, you'll bring your attention back, and then, okay, great, but why? Again, this is looking for that sort of,
I think I get, because you've been doing it so many times, right? If in the practice, let's say your mind's wandering during the practice, and then you've been able to bring your attention back.
yes,
So in real life, if something happens, you'll be able to bring your attention back.
yes, I agree, that's absolutely right, and that is the practice part, and that's the reinforcing, and that is this sort of, this feeling, this knowing, but you're still stepping over, but so that was very important. You're still stepping over a part that I think is, that you're just assuming. You know what that part is that you're stepping over? And it is what Shannon said.
To bring your attention back.
She didn't say that. She ended with that. She didn't start with that.
If you notice yourself
If you notice. So it's a practice of what? It's a practice really of
noticing.
keeping an eye out for mind wandering. Right? Wonderful. Excellent. So then if you practice noticing your mind wanders, and when you hear the footsteps or the door click, what might happen to your attention? What might happen to your mind, so to speak? It might wander off. What might that wandering consist of in a very practical way? I mean, it's not just like it's a puppy dog that runs away and you don't know what's going on. You sort of know what's going on at some level. What might you experience when you hear the clicking of the door?
Look away.
You could look away, but what else? What might you be experiencing in terms of the activity of the mind?
Your attention just moves.
Yes, your attention moves, but what will you be experiencing? You're absolutely right.
I'm not sure.
Well, where is your attention going to go?
To that.
Well, what does that mean it's going to go to that?
So whatever is distracting you at the moment. So the door opening.
Oh, good. Ah, great. Ready to, thank you, awesome. Perfect time. The door opens.
So my attention shifted there for a second, and then
And what? There's something that happens after that.
I was able to catch myself.
Yes, but there's something that happens before that. And it is a choice, but there's something that's going on.
Thoughts, feelings, sensations.
So let's do it a little different. Let's make it a little more explicit. You're sitting there. You're in your house. You're studying. You hear a sound, right? But now you hear it again. You hear it again. Now, is it just going to be aware and then get back?
No, answer the door.
Why are you going to stop to answer the door?
Because
I know because you keep hearing it, but there's something else happening between keeping hearing and answering the door.
I'm getting annoyed.
You might be getting annoyed.
Feeling
You
suspicious.
choose to.
Huh?
You decided to open it.
You're deciding to.
Your attention is shifted.
Your attention has shifted.
Creating space.
Creating space. Boy, you just come in and you're there with us. I love it, honestly.
You're noticing like the feelings and emotions that are arising.
Noticing feelings and emotions that are arising.
last week.
All of this is true. There's something. Remember, thoughts are not facts. So what might you have? When somebody's knocking and knocking and knocking and your attention goes and you get a little agitated, what else might be coming along? Something is putting us in the right direction. What? What say? Yes, you just
no,
said.
someone's there.
Someone's there. And then what other thought might you have?
I have to go answer it.
I could go answer it. Okay, very nice. Now, remember how when we did the spiral, we were like thoughts, feelings, sensations, and then we drew the fire? Where was the fire hottest? At the thoughts or at the feelings? At the feelings. It's very cold almost at the level of thoughts. We don't really notice them. I got to get the door. Someone's there. Now, if it's in your house and somebody's knocking on the door and you know it's appropriate to answer the door, you'll have a thought, perhaps, oh, I should answer the door. And we so identify with that thought that before we know it, we're just answering the door. It's like we have this thought, that person's an idiot. And before we know it, we're ridiculing them, or we're dissing them, or we're just sort of, making judgments and assumptions about them.
Is that what you thought of my finger?
No. You just happened to come in at the point in time we were talking about door knocking. So, what thought might you have if you're really paying close attention when you're in the library studying and there's a little knock at the door and the door opens and closes? It could be like this, because we're curious creatures, aren't we? I wonder. You might have that as an example. I've got no idea what kind of thoughts you'll have, right? And if you wonder who it is, then what might you do? Look at them. All right, if I had a thought, I wonder who it is, and I was wondering who it is. But if you are skilled in noticing mind wandering, then when the attention is drawn, a thought may arise, right? Attention is just sort of directing the content of thoughts, feelings, and sensations. If you couldn't hear and you didn't even notice the door was going, your attention wouldn't go there and you wouldn't have any of this. But because you've been practicing focused attention, your attention moves. You might have a thought. You become what? Now your word comes along. Your big A word. You become aware. As opposed to just having the thought. Thoughts are not facts. If you're at home, maybe it's useful to follow up on the idea. Maybe I should get the door. I wonder who that is. I wonder if that's the electrician. And it could be, or I wonder if it's that person that wants me to, I keep telling them no and let them keep knocking maybe, right? Or I wonder who that is. It's like, okay, but you have to, act on your wondering. So you notice that you're having a thought, and then because you've been practicing, like you said, on a regular basis, you more naturally and effortlessly do what? Shift your attention back. And this is why the mindfulness focused attention practice can be helpful. And like you said so brilliantly, and because you're getting into the groove of noticing and returning and returning and returning, then when you find yourself there, and again, you're not there saying, I can't wait for my friend to come in. Right? If you can't wait for your friend to come in, then that's a totally different story. If you can't wait for the electrician, then that's a totally different story. You're waiting to have your attention pulled so you can then move in that direction. And here that's not the case. The intention is to stay with. Nice. Now how would the open monitoring practice be a little different? Yes, thank you.
Honestly, I think the difference is about engagement. I think that when you're doing a focused intention practice, you notice the things, you engage with it, you engage with your noticing of the thoughts and feelings and interactions of your thoughts, and you have to pull yourself back, refocus your attention, whatever you want to call it, but whatever it is, you're engaging with whatever the object of your attention is at that point, and making sure that you come back to somewhat of like an engagement and understanding of what's going on with your awareness and what's around you. And I think the difference between that and monitoring is just that there isn't really any engagement at all. It's just observation. It's allowing yourself to, like you're sitting on a beach watching everything go by, right? You're watching the waves come in and out, and thoughts, the feelings, they flow, they come, they go, whatever you want to call it. They're just continually moving and coming onto the shore, and you're sitting there observing, and just, there's a wave, there's a wave. I like that wave, whereas I think focused attention, you might see something and say, okay, that set's coming in, I need to start paddling, I need to get on it, and then like bring myself back to where I was. I think that honestly is probably the biggest difference, at least the way I see it.
Isn't that great? That's great. You like it?
Crush that.
Yeah, I think that's great. Very nice. Now, it is very observational. So let's sort of explore this. And the mountain metaphor is very helpful. So when you do the practice, the mountain metaphor is helpful, right? Because all these things are happening, but the mountain has no agenda. The mountain is just there. The mountain is witnessing it. You could be a redwood tree. You can find your own metaphors, right? This presence that isn't, the mountain's not getting up and going, what's that other thing doing over there? The mountain's not getting up and saying, what are those ants doing there? The mountain is just present. Now, of course, we're probably more than a mountain. We have more capacity. Right? This is sort of, again, like David reminded us early on, this is like being in the balcony, like the mountain is on the balcony. But we're also, right? We're also the mountain. We're also moving through, we're a mobile mountain now, right? So you're focusing, you're doing something like reading that, and then there's like this. Well, what did we notice about that sound, everyone? It did what? You echoed a bit?
What was the question?
What did you notice about the sound?
So the vibration of the song.
What did you notice about the vibration?
Felt it in my feet.
And what do you notice about the feeling in your feet?
Not much.
Still there?
No, it's gone.
Yeah, it's gone.
Okay.
Was it there before I did it?
No,
Okay, so what is it that we notice about the sound, the vibration, the feeling in the feet?
it was fleeting.
Comes and goes. Comes and goes. Everything comes and goes. I can't stand that person. Comes and goes. I gotta fix this. Even that comes and goes. What does it persist? We bring it back. The circumstances stay the same so that that conditioned way, maybe they're useful. So the way you can be observant, the way you describe it, which is really poetic, very, and felt very intuitive also. You're studying and you just hear. It's not going to be so hard to get back, is it? In fact, most of your attention stays there. You could just say for a minute, you might just get a flicker, right? Almost like you can't help the flicker. It's almost like good, but nothing. It's not grabby. But it's kind of like meh. Right? Might be a little harder, right? In fact, it might even call for your attention, being turned on purpose. So some things are going to grab us, and some things aren't going to grab us. The things that don't grab us, well, we've already got our open monitoring mask out there. You're studying, and and then the air conditioner goes on. Oh, what is doing? Sometimes you might be perplexed and annoyed and frustrated, and it takes your attention away. You end up writing an email. You send you get me the manager. Spiral, snowball. But oftentimes it's just like we almost habituate to it. So we practice open monitoring to become more skilled at what? Having the things that naturally or historically would have grabbed our attention be less likely to grab at our attention. We're still going to notice it? Yes. But we just more naturally.
It's just choosing whether or not to engage.
Choosing whether or not to, choosing whether or not to engage, yes. But in some ways, perhaps even better, I would suggest. So, choosing if there's a choice, if it's useful to have a choice to be made, then it would be very important to be able to choose. But oftentimes it's just sort of like, should I stay with this or should I no, it's not even necessary. But that doesn't mean that our attention isn't pulled away by every little thing sometimes, especially if we're antsy or we're frustrated, etc. We're more likely to be agitated by things. So we practice for that. Okay, very nice. All right. So, if you would, take your tools of awareness. Which one is the one that for you is the most useful so far? I would encourage you to write that on the big blade. Focused attention, open monitoring, body scan. Which one have you found so far has been your more likely to go to? And maybe write that on this particular blade. I could have said, let's make the big blade the focused attention, which is maybe what a lot of you are doing because it's the one that's most familiar. We've done it for the most number of weeks. But also it's like basic to all of them. Like sharpening our attention, sharpening our focus. You can look at a lot of different ways. But I said do what you want because ultimately you'll turn to the practices that you find most useful. And then we've got this other little screw one over here. So maybe this could be another one. So write maybe one of the other two. And then we've got, what is this? This one at the top left. Does anybody know? Is that a oh, I see it.
Bottle.
A beer bottle. Is that what it is? Okay. What's the thing at the end for it?
It's like if you have a twist off kind of cap, it gets under the bottom.
Ah, okay, gotcha. Thank you. Just visualization, much information about myself. So put the 3 practices that we've done, because this is just a reminder for you. And what I want to encourage you to be able to do is for each one of those 3, there's 4, so we're going to get to another one today. But for those 3, and I would, it doesn't really matter, but I would have it where you sort of work your way from the big blade and then to the left, and leave that little one off to the side. But it really doesn't matter. If I were to have it as an assignment, write down the elements of each of these practices. At this point in time, you ought to be able to write down the elements of each of these practices, just like Lewis did so effectively with focus attention. And then if we were to look at it, I'd be like, oh, place your attention on the breath, aware of the breath, attention to the breath, and bring your mind back, and then lift your gaze, open your eyes, like, oh, what did we miss? And then, Lewis, what would we add?
Sorry,
He's gotten so good at focused attention. You were just an outside.
No, that's really good, because you were very focused, but how did you hear my voice? Because you were aware. Open monitor. And then because probably the better decision would have been, and in this case probably just the natural one, to respond. You had a choice. You could have been like, I'm going to ignore that guy, because he's interrupting me. I was commenting on focused attention on the breath, and then the pieces we'd be adding here would be, and when you notice your mind wandering, returning to the breath, and then, when you're ready, lifting your gaze, opening your eyes. Very nice. But of course, even if you wrote that, it wouldn't be quite right. That would be having the focused attention too narrowly construed, wouldn't it? Why would that be not quite right? 1, bring your body into an upright posture. Optional, but let's say it's a good thing to have there. 2, take a few slower, deeper breaths. Optional, but it's good to have there. Creates a good foundation for the practice. 3, it's almost like you're going to have to use this knife to do something. Adjust your posture and take a few breaths. Might be helpful. Andre, would it be helpful for survival to take a few breaths to steady oneself before they go into charge into action to do what they need to do? Perhaps, if they're overly charged up. That's likely to miss things. I answered the question because I wasn't sure you were going to give me the answer I wanted, so I figured I'd just plow ahead and give you the answer. Do you think it's helpful to take a few slower, deeper breaths at times if one is feeling overly?
Yeah, sure.
Andre and I've had some nice conversations over the semester in terms of these interesting questions about mindfulness as being a, how to really find our way through to the heart of what's useful, what's hype. Right? Useful and hype. Of which there is hype and there is useful, I think. But if we were to say, adjust posture, take a few slow deeper breaths, bring attention to the breath. When your mind wanders from the breath, bring your attention, and you realize it, bring your attention back, and then open your eyes. What would be rendering this? In fact, we could say, to Max's point, if we just had the focused attention, we're not doing this in the class, but if we just had the focused attention knife, and it was just the focused attention knife, we'd have all these different blades. What might the different blades represent? And the answer comes from how was the instruction that I just gave. So focus attention practice. If I were to say the only way to do focus attention practice now is to place your attention on an object of the breath, and when you notice your mind wandering from the breath, to bring your attention back. You might say, no, that's too narrow. Because what did I say that was overly narrow? Somebody could take one of the words I said, turn it into a totally different word, and it would still be a focused attention practice.
Breath.
Very nice. The breath. It's an object. The breath happens to be the object. So we could have our own little knife here if we really wanted to go deep, and it's like, it could be an image you hold in your mind. It could be sound. It could be what a person's saying. It could be the thing you're reading. That could be all these things, and these would be the objects. Right? And of course, whether you have it as a knife where you're saying, oh, I'm going to pay attention to sound, or I'm going to pay attention to what that person's saying, or I'm going to pay attention to the breath, we're doing that, as Josh pointed out, naturally anyway. But here we're using the tool to develop that capacity. So at this stage, for each of these 3, you ought to be able to actually write down what those elements are. And that might be an assignment for the week that you'll get. There'll be a self-assessment that will be on the class page. So you can go to engage where you are in terms of your ability to respond to certain questions that at this stage I think should be well understood or readily understandable. And I'm going to set up a time or two, so it can be open office hours, so that if you found that there were certain aspects of it that you didn't quite get, to be able to ask those questions. And they'll all be about the assessment. Not graded, but important, if nothing else, just so you don't need to come to the office hours. Just so you can go, oh, I have no idea what you're talking about. And perhaps that would be useful to you. Okay. We've got the article by Judge Gold. Judge Alan Gold is a wonderful, wonderful federal judge, now retired. He was an extraordinarily well-regarded federal district judge in the Southern District of Florida. Before that, he was a state court judge. And before that, he was a partner at Greenberg Trauer. And he wrote a longer piece for the Florida Bar that I'll put up on the website as optional reading. That was published in the Florida Bar Journal that really takes this and turns this into like a 7 to 10 page, larger piece. So let's talk for a few moments about Judge Gold's piece, Mindfulness, a Challenge for Our Times. What did you find surprising, interesting? What was the takeaway for you from this piece? Yes.
Yeah, I guess the thought I had about his piece, he goes, I think, towards the end, he kind of talks about one of the things companies can do is group meditations and stuff. So I actually had the thought that, because his whole point in the start is about how lawyers are apprehensive because maybe they'll lose their edge, like Paul said. But I think maybe if companies are offering group meditation and stuff, it could help some of the ego-headed lawyers get over that aspect of see other people doing it and get them kind of over that hump, the apprehensiveness off the start.
Yes, yes. It is interesting when organizations begin to offer mindfulness. If the leaders of the organization are not there, that's saying something, right? And in those areas, whether it is an insurance company, as has been the case with a very important insurance company, a very major insurance company, its leader found mindfulness to be helpful, personally in particular and professionally, and just not only ultimately made it part of the ethos of its employees, but actually became a part of what can be insured, which is this. So yes, he is interested in the systems at play and knows that while it's a personal practice, offering it in a group setting can be helpful. Nowadays, if you go to a firm and you get membership in a gym, we don't think much about that. But there was a time when actually that wasn't so clear. Or yoga is now a classic example. And there's other examples in that regard. Very nice. What else from Judge Gold's article? Yes?
At the beginning, where he says, the wheel we go through, I thought was very important because
Say more. You say the wheel, but he doesn't say the wheel.
no, not a will, because I mean, he says that you sacrifice your health in order to make money. Then when you have money, you have to get your health, and then you later gonna see that you only have this life, but you haven't lived it. So
yeah, right. This is he's saying beware. Right? Like he puts it in his first paragraph. He's saying be careful of this.
yeah.
And of course, that money piece is interesting. We all can have a comment on that, like
Yeah.
it matters. And for people, it's not just the money; it's reputation, it's being successful. There's a lot of things that achievement piece speaks to. Is he suggesting that we should compromise that? He's suggesting that we should decide to make less money or be less successful. Is that anywhere in here?
No.
Just some of us maybe at times think though that is sort of going to be compromised a little bit. And so, is taking this with you when you're camping going to compromise your ability to thrive in that environment? No, right? You would not want to go without your switchblade. It reminds me of There's a story of a long time ago in a village. Word had spread of this crazy fisher person. He was a crazy fisherman. He was crazy. And he was crazy, everyone thought, just like, what's going on with this person? Because he fished with a straight hook. And every day all the fisher people would go out and they'd come back with their catches, and he never caught anything. And people would say, what are you doing? You're fishing with a what? You're fishing with a straight hook. And he's like, I know. And they're like, you're not going to catch anything. He's like, we'll see. Right? And every day, like unbelievable. And then one day, word had spread all the way to the king, who said, what is this I hear of this crazy fisher person? The king said, I don't know, I've heard it too. Crazy. Not going to catch anything. So they both said, you know what? Bring us this person. Bring this person, this person to us. So the guards go out and they find the person one day fishing with nothing to show for it. Bring him to the royalty and present him. And he comes in and they're like, what is this I hear? Why are you fishing with a straight hook? You're never going to catch anything. And the fisherman replied, but I'm fishing for you. So in some ways, we could even have this be where if we really were to sometimes look deep into what we feel about this endeavor, it's like it's a straight hook. What's the point? Or might I lose something along the way, like the fish I need to catch? You don't have to have just one hook in this way. So thank you, that's right. What is when you read that right up front in Judge Gold's first paragraph? What is that? How does that affect you?
Because in São Paulo, I used to work like 12 hours a day. Even I used to complain. I didn't like it, but I kept going. So it's like a will.
It's like a wheel. And there's nothing wrong. I worked at White and Case. I was out the door at 6:30. I was there at 6:45, 7 o'clock. I was there till 8, 7, 9 o'clock, sometimes 5, 6, but not even before 6. Oftentimes 7, 8, and sometimes till 4 o'clock in the morning. I remember finishing up. We had a big project with the government of Colombia as our client. I'm driving home. It's like 4 o'clock in the morning. Getting home, I don't even know if I slept. It was just like shower, eat, and then come right back. Like to continue this huge project with like 12 other people that were all doing the same thing. And I had a baby. Our first child, Millie, was born right around that time. So it's interesting. I would say this. If you want to be doing that, then be all in. Make a wise decision, make a compassionate decision, and be all in. Because you see, if we're like, why am I running this wheel? Why am I stuck in this wheel? I can't believe it. If you go back to our discussion of pain and suffering, whatever pain there is and just the endurance of getting the work done, that's there to be had. And it can actually feel good. It can be intellectually stimulating. It can be a source of, wow, I did it, especially if the outcome is like, wow, that person, that situation. But if we're simultaneously going, oh, I can't believe I have to do this, and that's the suffering. And we might find ourselves depleted, not because of the work that we have before us, but because of our resistance to being in the situation we're in and being it played out the way we're playing out. Can we free ourselves from the resistance? Can we get off the spiral so that we can take at more face value and direct value what's actually in front of us to then make a decision that's much more in alignment with what we have in front of us. Hopefully that makes sense. And hopefully there's something about these practices that we're learning that you could answer the question, why these practices and many other endeavors. I'm a big believer in many things that we can do to support ourselves. I believe in finding time to be with really good friends who you care about you, who trust you, and to make those decisions wisely. I'm a really big believer in trying to eat well. not every friend's going to be like the perfect friend. Not every food you eat is going to be the perfect food you eat. That's okay too. But can you try to maximize and optimize among these different factors? So that's really important, right? That's really important. For those of us who haven't practiced yet, that's an important reminder. You're hearing it not because Judge Gold said it. You're hearing it because your classmate is speaking to her own direct experience. And here she is. She's not out of the game. To the contrary. What?
Survive it.
Right. To the contrary. Here you're continuing to thrive. Continuing certainly to move into this space. What else about one more comment on Judge Gold's paper? There's so much we could talk about. Yes, Austin.
I don't think he went super deep into this, at least in this particular paper, but he seemed to sort of imply that if you, like, there's an exponential effect in the legal field as a whole, that we kind of almost have a duty, not just to ourselves, but to the profession. Because if more of us sort of do this and reap the benefits of it and become better, more understanding, more compassionate people, it sort of catches on and has, an exponential effect. And then in turn, if that rubs off on someone else in the legal field, then those situations that cause those, sort of frustrating, snow globe situations in the first place, sort of minimize.
Right, that's great, that's nice, that's right. We are interconnected. One of the projects that my colleague Amici John and I in our lab are working on now is, I think I may have shared with you, is a mindfulness training program for senior leaders. These are one-star generals in the military. They've just moved into that one-star rank. It's a different world for them. It calls for, it's like they're like back at square one. Now they're at star one. It's a great place to be. They're leaders. They interact with, they're responsible for, they have responsibility for not only the people that they're leading, but all of us. And when I say all of us, I'd like to think all of us. So we've been interviewing these 4-star generals and 3-star generals and these really extraordinary, and I didn't grow up in the military, so I never fully appreciated just how extraordinary these people are. And we're talking about compassion, and we're talking about empathy, and we're talking about being able to understand and try to understand what's going on in another person, be able to ask questions about how you're doing, while getting the most vital sort of life on the line kinds of work done. How do you, so and these are capacities. Even in Leonard Riskin's article, he talks about social skills, empathy, etc., and how mindfulness practices can help develop those, which also, we're all born with empathy, we're all born with compassion. We could have that be this thing here too, right? Compassion, empathy, attunement, respect. Okay. Charity Scott. Since we just talked about a little bit. Mindfulness helps undergraduates stay on track. This was a nice little study we did here at the university about almost 10 years ago. It's very applicable to you all. I think it's applicable to me, but certainly undergraduates are a couple years behind you, most of you. It was here at the university, and we tracked them over the course of the semester. Why do you think we tracked them over the course of the semester, as opposed to the summer or some other time?
It gets harder because it's more stressful.
Yeah, it gets harder. It gets harder if nothing else, just because like you said, you got fun, you got midterms, and you got, everything else going on. So it was able to track as the pressure was mounting. And it was our attention, this fixed, stable entity, is it like you have a 9-volt battery over the course of the semester, it's not going to deplete for another 3 years, it's, expiration date is, I don't know, maybe you're shining your little flashlight of attention, but you can trust that between day 1 and day, whatever the end of the semester is, it's going to be shining just as bright? No, Matt, you're saying no. This is a depleting resource. You get a good night's sleep, you eat well, you feel at ease to some extent, you're less distracted, and it replenishes. And if you're going to be focusing and getting work done, then try to be all in there so that you minimize the depletion. Right? because so much of the depletion is the resistance that we talked about a few moments ago. And in fact, resistance, when we talk about magnet, the aspect of the battery is not inapplicable. So we chose the semester because over the course of the semester, as you're learning and studying and getting tired and approaching finals, well, you get that. Well, what did the study find? What did the study find? Yes?
I thought it was interesting that it said that it helped with attention, but it didn't change anything with mind wandering.
Show us what you're reading, if you would.
Oh, I don't have it with me. I have it on the computer. It says,
Here.
by the end of the training interval, the control group showed diminished attention and reported increased mind wandering, while those who participated in the program showed significant improvements in attention and no increase in reported mind. Oh, I read it wrong.
Okay, very nice. But now you get it, right? Now, it would have also been interesting.
I read it wrong, but I still kind of like ran with it, and I thought it was interesting because you talked about how mind wandering can be useful sometimes, and I read a lot about how mind wandering actually is a useful tool. So I thought that was interesting. I'm like, oh, okay, maybe it was more productive mind wandering that they engaged.
You feel an energetic momentum to defend your prior position?
Yes. But but just, that's where my mind went when I read that.
Yeah, okay, so let's take it for what it is.
Yes.
And you're absolutely right. There's more to be said about mind wandering is not in and of itself problematic. It is a tool for survival. And survival in the context of some environments is greater creativity, is greater, a lot of things. It can even be in the service of well-being. So their finding is that the control group had more mind wandering and not as highly, on the attention dimension, whereas those who practice mindfulness had, say it again now that you stated it.
There was no increase in mind
They
wandering.
didn't have an increase in mind, even though the pressure was mounting. We would tend to mind wander more. And their attention was very nice. Now you're speaking to something separate. Now you're also speaking to a couple of things. First of all, when people tend to begin to practice mindfulness and they self-report on mind wandering, do you think that people who begin practicing mindfulness might report more mind wandering than they do earlier on in their, you actually notice the mind wander. Does that mean their mind is wandering more? No. Right? That's huge. And that's what makes it so invisible, to try to put words into it. But if many of you nodded like, yeah, I would suggest to you that if I had asked that same question 8 weeks ago, you would not have had as intuitive and visceral a knowing of what was being said. And you would really know it, not because you somehow corralled your mind from wandering, but because you're just aware of how much it wanders. So let's not get too concerned with what it's supposed to look like as the outcome. Just sort of trust that will emerge. That's at least my suggestion from my own experience. Trust that it will emerge. Just like if you were in lit skills, it would be like, okay, you're ready for that thing? Yeah, but I'm not sure. Go out, you're ready. Just trust that you will deliver, and you'll learn along the way. It's like, oh my God, I did it! Well, it emerged. We've been watering seeds that have been planted. And they're growing whether you see them or not, as long as we keep watering them. And every time we practice, we're watering the seeds. Anything else about this piece? And thank you, Kevin, for that. And thank you for reading it, not quite, sort of, in some ways you almost read it the way you are already interested in thinking about it, right? It sort of influenced how you put those words.
I read my comment wrong, actually. That's what it is.
You're still
I'm like a 10 out of 5 today, so I'm noticing that because.
Okay, well, know that if you just answered the question straight out, it wouldn't have led to nearly a robust and I hope for a meaningful conversation about what's really important about that. The finding is sort of much less important in the way we understand the finding. So, I'm sorry it's a 10. It is what it is. In fact, we'll do a little exercise in a moment, so maybe settle us in a little bit. Okay, very, very nice. We have Charity Scott's piece that we'll answer in just a little bit. Before we do, though, let us maybe stand. Give a little bit of space between you and your neighbor. Perhaps you begin to, and even now, when you start to do this, I hope that you are, well, I want to, suggest, to notice for yourself, can you notice how you can bring your attention on purpose to the sensations of your body as you're moving, the movement, the way it feels, aches, pains, whatever it might be, and how you could almost just as easily just have your mind go off thinking about lunch? Right? You can do that, can't you? In fact, think about lunch for a moment. What are you going to have for lunch? Where are you going to go? And notice, by the way, that you might actually stop moving if you could to really try to focus on that. But here we are, we're continuing to move. Be deliberate. And of course, you don't have to deliberately think about lunch. If we do this long enough, and for some of you already, maybe Shannon at a 10, you're already thinking about other things. Okay, slow it down. And notice that the slower you go as you slow it down, the more what? The more deliberate and slow you go. As a general rule, the more what you will be.
Wandering.
Huh?
Wander.
What?
Wandering.
If you go slow and are really attentive to slowing down the movement, you believe that you'll wander more?
For me, yeah.
So I can't argue with that. Well, it's interesting. I could imagine there being a sweet spot where if you go too slow, you sort of stop paying attention to it. It's like an automatic pilot, and you would wander more. And if you're going too fast, you don't have to really pay much attention either. In fact, that's really nice. I like that. Can you find the sweet spot, right, where you're really with it? Okay. And then the street. And notice, if your mind is off wandering, that's, if you're aware, that is, it's not the end of the game, but the game doesn't begin really without it. So open and receptive as we move up. Be attentive to your neck. I was just thinking about something and I realized all of a sudden my neck is strained. Be in alignment. And of course, if you want to be in alignment, you got to be what? Aware. Right? How the body feels. The arms come down slowly. When? 3 slowly deeper breaths. The wind flowing through the trees. And then clouds. You understand the gist of it by now. Hands gently moving across. And again, as Marcella sort of offers us, not so fast, not too slow. Can we have it where our attention is really tracking the movement? It's almost like if you know the difference between automatic and manual and driving a car, it's like we're going into power. I could imagine you know the difference between manual and automatic, stick shift and that. And here we are sort of taking a little bit more firm control over the movement of the body by going from automatic pilot into manual. And then the arms come down. It's also that reminder that this too shall pass. Thoughts and feelings that are coming and going, that they always do. The sun, this will be the practice we learned today in a more fully realized form. And of course, by now, you know. Let me say it. If you don't know, you want to, I think. This is really important. be a pressure thing. It's a real gift. Some of the people out there can benefit from what you have to offer without it depleting you. Whether there's clients or your family or even yourself. That's benefit. The bird, this is where I close my eyes, but be good to your balance. You're just listening. If you had the switchblade or the pocket knife, you would pull out the blade or listen. It's also an open monitoring practice, isn't it, in your life? And then you close. Notice the breathing. At the beginning you do it on purpose 3 times to slow us down, to steady us a little bit, but even during this practice, if your mind is wandering, the breathing will stop. So we're really orienting ourselves to the body. And here we are, this is the open monitoring pose, right? We're just present. We're not attending to anything in particular, we're not moving the body, we're not taking slower breaths, we're not even paying attention to the breath. We're just here. We can slowly take our seat. See if we can stay here as we slowly take our seat. Any questions about, listen carefully please, any questions about anything we've talked about thus far that is not clear? And I would imagine that there's lots of things that could fall into that category, but I'm interested in if you can articulate one of them, what it might be. Matt?
I have a question about the presentations we're doing.
Have we discussed that today thus far in class, Matt?
We talked about it later.
See, that's a good lawyer. That's a good lawyer. You patterned it.
If not, I would say maybe.
Well, I could also address it a little bit later.
Yeah.
Okay, so thank you.
Yeah.
It's an important topic. We will talk about it, especially before we leave today's class, because in a week, in a little bit, you'll be presenting on your papers. Anything about what we discussed thus far in class today, keeping really tight to the subject matter, that's confusing, meaning it was explained or spoken of, and it's like, okay, so there'll be a special assessment. There'll be a self-assessment online that you can go through. And it's going to be using this feedback groups. Have you all used feedback groups in your classes? So after you put your answer, you'll see other people's answers. Right? So you can get a sense of other people in relationship to your answers. I would say it's not graded, but everything you turn in, I look at for my sense of your engagement in turning it in. That certainly is a part of engagement in the class and participation. But don't worry, you can be totally wrong in your answers. But, and I would hope that you're allowed to like try to figure out the answer before you answer it. So it's not like it's a closed book kind of thing. But at the same time, have it be more like if you don't know the answer, that you, whatever you do to try to figure out the answer, that helps you learn it. Rather than just get the right answer. That's sort of like completely unimportant. In and of itself, it's completely unimportant. Even though we might think it's the most important thing. Okay. I very much enjoyed reading or reviewing some of your outlines, those that I received yesterday up to a certain point in time. I'm going to comment on some of the comments that you all made regarding answering some of those questions. I think it could be helpful more broadly based on what you said. And I've enjoyed, several of us, maybe a half dozen have met one-on-one sessions to talk about your papers. Again, the invitation is open to do so as we go and along the way. I know you all are busy. Nothing is required in this regard. You will be working on developing your outline, and you can begin writing anytime you want. I'm not here to stop you from starting the writing process, but we are going through a development of your argument, if you will, a development of the outline. I think that that's very helpful, so as you really get to writing, you know where you're going. But at this stage, you all are, you know what you're doing. So here we have here's a really great, this is going to be a really great paper topic. And in going through the articles and resources that this person listed, they pulled out a couple, too, that were not a part of the readings. Well done. As I said in the video, if you think that the readings in this class that are meant to give a big picture that everybody can relate to are somehow going to be pertinent to your narrow subject matter, that's just not the way it works. So you are to be, and this is one of the things for this week, researching what is out there in my area. And for this particular person, who's got thinking fast and slow in their paper, which is its own very interesting area, there is a colleague of mine at Boulder named Peter Juan, who has written several articles integrating thinking fast and slow, which is Daniel Kahneman. If you know Daniel Kahneman, a really important psychologist and economist, that brings together mindfulness, thinking fast and slow in the same piece, which is interesting. Also, in terms of, would you read a paper on the same topic, and if so, what would you hope to learn from it? I'm interested, if I read, I would hope to be blah, 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 and feel a sense of relief that a daily practice can help clear my mind. So when I read can help clear my mind, I think to myself, I know what you mean. Like less of a snow globe, less of a spiral, right? But are you actually clearing your mind? No. We put up a functional MRI and looked at the activity of the brain in terms of blood flow, et cetera, or put up an EEG and looked at it. Would it just sort of go flat? Would it just be so perfectly harmonized and integrated that it's just nothing but pure presence? And if there were pure presence, would that eliminate thoughts? No. But I know what you mean, I think. In fact, all I can best say is I think I know what you mean, right? But the reader will actually be led down the wrong path, won't they? To think that they'll clear their mind. So, it's a perfectly helpful response to this question. When writing your paper, be careful of the language you choose, because we are lawyers, we operate with precision, and to clear my mind of thoughts is almost ubiquitous in this conversation and in this landscape. But it's just simply not happens. But something does happen which has that phrase mean something. And that's what we want to be able to speak to. By directing my attention in the last few months on mindfulness, I believe I will be able to bring personal anecdotes and metaphors from the class into the paper. The metaphors are for you as part of our learning process. If you seek to bring a metaphor like the snow globe or the spiral or the balcony into your paper, you run the risk of wasting a lot of space to make a little point in terms of the point you probably want to make. And I'm not going to be like, oh good, I saw that you brought the metaphor into the paper, because I'm going to see that the cost-benefit analysis is in all likelihood, if I can be mistaken, lost in doing just that. So draw upon the metaphors to help you understand, talk with friends and say, oh, it's like the snow globe, and that people will get that. But if in a paper of 15 pages, you either don't do it, don't flesh it out enough, you're going to leave the reader confused. Like, oh, it's like a star, it's like a snow globe, oh, nothing snow globe, like, oh, just relax or something, right? And if you spend too much time fully exploring it, you could take 15 pages just exploring what the personal anecdotes. Yeah, that's really great. We talked about personal anecdotes, right? Don't give too much information. Don't write anything that you're not comfortable writing about. But if you're writing about something that relates to you, procrastination, somebody's writing about, sort of, coming at this law school experience in a slightly different status than others that don't tend to come to it. You're writing about that because you relate to it personally. And so your personal anecdotes are very relevant without it being just disgorging of me, right? Which might be really interesting, but not probably helpful to the reader. And probably won't allow you to get the information out. The scope may be too broad. This is the question. Are you aware of any factors that are a source of concern? This is a topic that's a really interesting one on negotiation. And one question is, who's your audience? This is a very important question. Who is your audience? This might change as you think about your paper. Who is your audience? As you probably know, who you're writing to affects how you're writing, what you're writing. If you were writing to somebody who's a real expert in mindfulness, it would be a very different paper than somebody who's never heard of mindfulness before. And you're assuming that your reader has never heard of mindfulness, doesn't know anything about mindfulness. You can assume that. None of you are writing a paper, nor would I suggest I'm writing a paper to the expert about taking it to the next level. But on this mediation, on this negotiation, to what audience are you writing? Law students, young lawyers, anyone interested in improving negotiations, is like the person staying away from saying lawyers. You have a lot to say. If you have a connection to mindfulness and negotiation, it's very relevant to lawyers. So don't feel, I don't know what's modern, how this person, there was this caveat at the end that anybody else interested, but they were saying lawyer, law students, don't feel you have to constrain yourself, because as it relates to negotiation, you might have a limited understanding in relationship. Like, who am I to tell a lawyer who can negotiate how to negotiate? But as it relates to mindfulness, you have a lot to say. And you can say in your paper, my experience with negotiation is X, Y, and Z, but I'm here going to be developing mindfulness around it. So a very good topic and thing to think about. And it could be that it is young lawyers, law students and young lawyers. But I would suggest to you that you have something to say to the lawyer who's been practicing doing negotiations for 35 years. And they could go, wow, I never thought about applying mindfulness to it. That's my way of saying I have great faith in each of you to say something that matters. Are you aware of any factors that are a source of concern for you relating to this project? People who may say, this is not for me, or others who may dismiss mindfulness. Well, if you're writing your paper for that audience, okay, that's interesting. You're writing to a group. If it's a source of concern that you're writing to a group who you're specifically saying, if you think this isn't for me, and you might dismiss mindfulness, I'm writing this for you, and you're concerned about that, then you probably shouldn't be writing about that. But for most of us, are you trying to persuade your readers? I mean, this is law, we persuade in arguments all the time, so I think that's not necessarily a straightforward answer. But when you're writing this, are you trying to persuade your reader? Are you trying to inspire and interest them in? There's a very fine line there, isn't there? It's not like, I don't give a hoot. I mean, if you didn't give a hoot, you probably wouldn't want to write the paper in the first place. It's just for me, I don't care about other people. Maybe you are at the stage where, for whatever reason, it is just for you. But I think for most of us, we have an interest in sharing this kind of thing. We find it useful. Like we want to share anything that we find useful. So please know, I'm not interested in you making the case for mindfulness. I'm not interested in you saying things or writing things or engaging in hyperbole that you may not yourself subscribe to or believe in. So if you have that concern, like I'm concerned that the person will read and go, I didn't do it for me. Let it be a concern that you weren't thoughtful and skillful in the way you communicated what you wanted to communicate. Don't let it be because you did a good job and they found it to be not satisfying. I'm not concerned about the latter. Many of you listed articles and resources that come from the class I already mentioned. You're going to need to go beyond that. You're going to need to go beyond that. You don't have to go searching far. You don't have to go, you have easy access to find out. You just put the keywords and phrases. You'll be surprised how many articles are out there. You'll be surprised how many articles are out there. And we'll talk about this to help clarify. While noting these facts, this is a person who's commenting on, would you read a paper on the same topic? I would definitely read a paper on this topic. By the way, if the answer is no, you wouldn't, then please pick a different topic. Part of the reason I want to write this paper is because it doesn't exist. Okay, and I think that it exists a little bit more than this author might think, but they're right. In large measure, there's not a whole lot out there. And more importantly, even if there was, well, we need more good pieces. Sometimes we think, oh, the idea has been taken. There's large articles written on every single idea in the history of the world, and keep getting read about them. Some of them might not be sort of necessary, but many of them are hugely important, even though it's been talked about a lot. Part of the reason I want to write this is because it doesn't exist. In the core competencies article, there is a short section entitled Self-Care. This is about the ABA, stress management and healthy habits, in which the authors note a lawyer should aim to be in a position to present herself with confidence and composure. Although this may be particularly difficult on occasion, at the extreme edges of this behavior, lawyers must be aware, aware of the signs of stress, depression, and substance abuse in themselves and those with whom they work. But while noting these facts and noting that maintaining confidence and composure, and then, quote, may be particularly difficult on occasion, the article doesn't explain how corporate transactional lawyers can actually do this. Right? It's telling us this is what you want to be able to do. Notice these signs. But it doesn't tell us how to do it. Now there's many ways of doing it. We're trying to. These are big issues. How the transactional lawyer can maintain equanimity and mindfulness in the middle of a hectic deal. And while it notes that we should be aware of signs of stress, it doesn't point to us how to be aware of such signs. This is really important. This is like sometimes the things that are written on mindfulness. It'll be like, we're told to pay attention our whole life, but no one's ever taught us how to pay attention. You know, we're told to be aware of something, but how to be aware. And on the one hand, we don't need to be told because we were born with this tool, these tools. But life can we can forget we even have them sometimes. And we might not be able to execute on them as fully as we'd like. And so we can practice that. So I think this is an important comment. In one, I was surprised at how much material is out there on this subject. This person took a look and I was surprised at how much material was out there on the subject. Are you aware of any factors that are a source of concern? I hope to remain as neutral as I can and not project any of my personal stuff into the paper. Well, I don't know. I mean, that's interesting. I mean, don't share too much information, that's for sure. Thank you. Don't share too much information, that's for sure. But your personal relationship to this material will make your paper much more interesting paper to others. How you balance that, right, is entirely up to you. Yeah, I think you will get that. I'm concerned about whether there's enough substance to produce 15 pages worth of interesting material. Don't be worried. Don't be worried. I see smiles. There's worry. There's worry in the room. it goes faster than you think. Most people ask for more pages, and most of the time I say no. I'm a slow reader. When I was in law school, I read my cases 3 times. I realized the first time if I had stopped there, I did well in law school. First time, I would have not done particularly well in law school. I would have read it. Second time, I figured I was sort of where people who read things and grasped things really well the first time, I probably was with them, and where most people sort of like in my ballpark would be after reading something twice. But then I read it the third time. And I think that was extremely hard. I think that sort of made a big difference for me. So I read slow. And I really want to read your paper and get something out of it. And as we'll talk about, your challenge is not going to be filling the 15 pages. Your challenge is going to be, and this is I think part of to produce 15 pages worth of interesting material. And I would sort of say, I don't think you're going to have a problem with 15 pages of interesting material. Material that really helps explain and goes to the heart of why it is that medication works. And isn't just take this because it'll lead to this. I hope to benefit from my paper through the research to be done on mindfulness and its benefits to the legal practice. As Paul Singerman recommended, in order to get the maximum benefit of meditation, you all need to read and learn as much as possible about it. Please, reread pieces, read them slowly. To reread 3 pages of Pappenheimer's article 10 times that seem to you to have something in there. I can guarantee, I'm saying I read it 10 times. But the 3rd time, the 4th time, the 5th time, you'll go, oh, wow. And the light bulb will get brighter every single time. That's my experience to this day reading this piece. I do not want to write a superficial paper. After our meeting today, we note I think it will be challenging to write narrowly and deeply. Right? You're not like covering the whole area of mindfulness, or if you're writing about transactional this, or negotiation this, or mergers and acquisitions that, you're not going to tell the reader about that subject matter. Presumably the reader knows about that subject matter. You're interested in connecting it up with. So how do we have it where we go? We're narrow and deep. Narrow and deep. And if you're like me, the less confident I am with something, the broader I go and the more superficial I am. But don't worry. You need not touch the depth of the bottom of the earth, right? Or the ocean. All right. We're going to close with a practice. Carrie Scott's article is such an important one and carries so much information that we will pick up with this as we go, and I encourage you to read it if you haven't. I know this was a busy time. But are there any observations about what you learned from Charity Scott's piece? Any questions, any points of curiosity, anything that you were surprised about? And she's going from pages 636 to 674. So there's about 40 pages for you. Right? Single space.
Yeah. I thought it was interesting at the beginning about all of the self-reporting lawyers regarding 53% had drank enough to get drunk in the past 30 days or whatever, and then going it further into been drinking twice a week, using marijuana, using whatever, right? And then I just found it interesting because she kind of speaks as mindfulness is a way to replace these bad coping mechanisms with positive. And I thought it's fascinating that essentially, the idea behind the anxiety and stress and the suicidal thoughts or whatever that's prevalent among lawyers and like really professional, field is that there is no good coping mechanism. And that mindfulness is one that could help and could reduce all of this stuff, but to me it just kind of more begged the question of, it sounds like nothing, it's putting band-aids on something that's giant, looks good, right? And instead of putting a larger band-aid with some Neosporin on it, it's something else needs to change. Because as much as mindfulness can help, it's not going to suture something that's system that's clearly just ingrained and brought upon us from day one of law school.
That's fascinating. A lot there. You said mindfulness isn't. You didn't say mindfulness practices though. So are you referring to the Band-Aid that just adds another layer of something that's another short-term fix that ultimately needs something bigger? Are you referring to mindfulness, being aware, present, wise, compassionate, engaged, centered, patient? Or are you referring to mindfulness practices? You're referring to mindfulness practices.
Yeah, I think the practice of mindfulness is more of the Band-Aid, whereas the actual like mindfulness as a whole, right, with the practice within the, you know, adding compassion, empathy, wisdom, and whatnot, human experience, and using that as a basis of kind of what we talked about earlier, and that, you know, the legal profession kind of started off as helping one another in this shared human experience we have, right? The practice is just part of that. It's not a generic thing. I think that mindfulness as a whole would do a much better job of closing that gap. But I think that, you know, replacing maybe marijuana with a medication, right? Is that going to better someone, or is that going to just change the way that they think, change the way, for better or for worse, right? And one might find that, you know, obviously it's legal in a lot of states, at least on the medical side, but, right, that's a whole different argument to get into. But aside from that, right, are you just replacing one bad habit with a good habit that will help you just kind of survive rather than thrive, right? And I think that's, I guess, my question.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, we really could have, maybe we'll bring that into next week's conversation. I think that's really, really, really important. At one stage of the game, you know, is mindfulness put out there as a panacea, right? Or mindfulness practice is put as a panacea, it's going to solve everything. Now you're referring to specifically what Charity Scott wrote in her piece and what she's zeroing in on. So bear in mind, again, this reminder, mindfulness in whatever form we speak about it is not what we're talking about when we talk about doing mindfulness practices. And mindfulness practices are, I think, as you're importantly noticing, just another thing to do to help us feel a little bit more calm. And I think it's a very apt thing, like to drink a little alcohol or smoke a marijuana, whatever it is, to feel calm down or whatever it is that it's intended to achieve. And taking a few and put, you know, that there's something similar there. And I would imagine if one is interested in looking for replacements, it's not like swapping it out, but building up from mindfulness practice capacity and seeing how other things might, this is what I would suggest in my experience, just begin to naturally fade away. Because there's less of, whatever it is that was sort of motivating it, there's less of that there motivating it. That would be nice. That's sort of like the sound while you're studying, and you're not trying to do anything, you're just less likely to get pulled away by it. At the same time, people do look at these practices as things to help me be more focused, and it is another thing to do. For which it's like another thing to do. And I think that what we're sort of exploring is how this, as Josh taught us up, it's dynamic, we're already born with it, and then the question is how ethical and how much of it is another thing to do versus a way of being more present. And we'll explore this in greater depth. I'd like to close with a new practice. It's the practice that resides here. And the relationship of mindfulness to substances, mindfulness practices, remember, mindfulness practices and substance abuse and related substance issues is hugely important. Some of you are writing about it, which is always each semester the case. And it's a very important subject matter. And I think it's really important to have a nuanced and mature reflection on it, as opposed to some little like, so, because otherwise it sets expectations for people that can then be, that work against the very fabric of what's intended. All right, so let's bring ourselves into it. So is it okay? Is everything okay if we go 3 minutes over? No. So we've learned the focused attention, we've learned the body scan, we've learned open monitoring, 3 primary pieces. Terry Scott did a nice job going through and talking about those. You can see how she sort of zeroes in on those. And so now let's do the practice known as connection. As we bring ourselves into a posture that's upright and stable. And there's a moment or two in this practice where you're going to bring to mind somebody who things might be a little difficult between you and they. Please, when I get to that point, depending on how you're feeling, etc., play it how you wish. And if you bring someone to mind, as the instruction invites, take somebody with whom things are not so challenging. And so we are aware of the body as we, with eyes lowered or closed, attend to the sensations of the body sitting as we breathe. Taking a few slower, deeper breaths, using your own tempo and pacing, but like Marcella reminds us, invites us, not the slowest imaginable and not rapidly rushing through it. Let's take these next few breaths really there for these breaths. And then as the breath resumes its natural pacing and rhythm, bringing to mind a sense of yourself at this time in your life. Perhaps you visualize yourself right here, right now, or somewhere that you might find yourself, at home, the library, or just a knowing glimpse of yourself. And as you do, wish for yourself, as best you can, in a way that feels right, may I be happy. May I be happy. Wish for yourself, may I be healthy, strong. May I be safe. May I live with ease of heart and peace of mind. Then, as a sense of ourselves recedes into the background of awareness, bringing to mind somebody who's been very good to us. Somebody who loves us, maybe as unconditionally as one can. Somebody from our childhood who may no longer be with us, they may have passed on. It could be a beloved pet still with us. As you bring to mind, to heart, this being that's been good to you, that cares about you, that supports you, has or still does, in whatever way makes sense, to wish for them, may you be happy. May you be safe. May you be healthy. May you be with peace of mind, ease of heart. As we breathe, and as a sense of this person recedes into the background, to bring to mind somebody who sort of is neutral to you. You don't really know them. Maybe you saw them today in the parking lot, or you stopped and got a drink on the way, or you sort of have a sense of them, but you don't know them. You've never really talked to them. You may have only seen them once in your life, but as you bring this very neutral person, as neutral as one can be, wish for them. May you be safe. May you be happy. May you be healthy. May you live with ease of heart and peace of mind. And as a sense of this person recedes into the background, whoever they may be, to bring to mind, and this is one to choose carefully, just someone who things aren't as great as you'd like them to be. You haven't done you any great harms or wrongs, as some people surely may have. Just at this particular time, it's just not as easy as you'd like it to be. In whatever way makes sense, always be good to yourself as you offer these wishes of kindness to wish for them. May you be safe. May you be happy. May you be healthy. May you live with ease of heart, peace of mind. And as they recede into the background, bringing into awareness all beings, everywhere, or as broad as you would like that circle to be. And to wish. You are a part of this circle. May all beings, or however large this group is, may we all be safe. May we all be happy. Find happiness. Find contentment. May we all be healthy. Find health. May we all live with ease of heart and peace of mind in this oh so challenging world, this oh so trying time. Allowing the sense of all beings to receive as you bring awareness more fully and firmly to yourself, sitting here, to the breath flowing through the body, aware of the in-breath, aware of the out-breath. And when you're ready in the next moment or two, and a little awareness of doing so, lifting the gaze, opening the eyes. This is the fourth of the practices that we're learning. It's a slightly different one. It goes back a long way. I found it to be hugely helpful in the practice of law. I'll share with you at times when that was the case. This is the practice that we'll be weaving with one of the other practices, the one you choose how to weave it, but you'll be practicing this loving kindness connection practice as it's done. Any questions or comments about that practice you guys experience? And for some reason you found it challenging when you left a little bit by time, that challenging person can be tricky. So it's meant to be just a little bit. Any comment, I'll be here. So
What is the name of this practice?
it's known as connection for our purposes, loving kindness in the way more broadly known. You'll have materials on it. And so, Matt, we will talk about the presentations and materials that I give you all, and that I'll be available for online through this week at different times, and you can always reach out. You will be doing partner practices. You will be partnered with somebody to guide them in a practice and to have them guide you in a practice. If you have a preference for who you'd like your partner to be, because you're buddies and you happen to have an easier time connecting, as long as you'll take it seriously, because sometimes when we're with our buddy, we don't take it as seriously, send me and Samantha an email saying, this is who I would request to be my partner. But otherwise, you'll just be randomly partnered up, and you'll be given instructions on how you will guide a practice and be guided in a practice. If you have not signed up for the Law Student Conference, and some of you have not, you will get an email from Samantha so that you can sign up for the conference. That's what Matt was referring to. You're going to get a link over your cell phone, which if you have an Apple will be useful. If not, then it won't be, but I'll provide you with other means. For an app that I created for our class called the So Be Mindful app, you'll get it through this thing called Test Flight. It's the way because it's a beta. It's not out there for public consumption. And you will download it, and let me know if you have any issues, but importantly, you will then have all of these 2-minute, 3-minute, 4-minute, 5-minute practices, open monitoring, focused attention, body scan, connection, etc., so that you can then just sort of in a more easy way where you are, listen to the various practices. You've got the special assessment. Thank you all very much for the time that we spent together. I hope you have a good weekend. I hope things are well, and I look forward to seeing you in the weeks to come. Do not fret your presentation. It is a colloquial hi, my name is, and this is what I'm interested in writing about. You're not meant to have your paper done or near done. You're still in the generative stages, but you've thought it through so that you can make a presentation about what you're interested in. And the most important thing will be hearing your classmates share their input and what they thought about it. But I'll provide you with more guidance in that regard. You do not have to have this rigidly thing prepared. In fact, it's serious, but it's not meant to be. It's meant to be a learning experience, not an experience in presenting. But it is another opportunity to practice presenting. All right, thank you.